Guys, welcome back. I've got Coach Michael Bann with me again. Now, here's what I know. Not a lot at the end of the day. And Michael said that he had a lot more that he wanted to talk about in terms of the aerobic system. So we wanted to hit a part 2 in terms of how you can continue to understand and optimize your aerobic system. So, Michael, just really quickly, what didn't we talk about in part 1 of the aerobic system conversation?
Yeah, we talked a lot about the physiology of the aerobic system, so cardiopulmonary, muscle fiber, mitochondria, all that stuff. But something we didn't talk about was how we get oxygen to the tissues so we can be aerobic, and then what comprises that, or like really like the basics of it. I'm not going to go into super in-depth, medical school physiology stuff, but the basics that everybody needs to kind of understand would be you need red blood cells, we need hemoglobin. Those are things that are super, super important for us to be aerobic. There's multiple things that kind of impact that, but long story short, nutrients. Your body is composed of things that we eventually eat, and your body takes those things and then like building blocks and like makes us. So I had a call today with a client of mine who had a nutritionist, a macros coach, and ran their labs and all that stuff. And their macros coach was just saying, hey, doesn't really matter what you eat. Just make sure you hit the macros at the end of the day, and you're good. Well, this person has been having horrible, horrible, horrible issues with being aerobic. They will die by the end of the session, and they're doing CrossFit classes now, or they were doing CrossFit classes, I should say. So essentially, their coach was just saying, or their macros coach was saying, it doesn't matter what you eat, just hit macros and you're good. They were not accounting for the fact that your carbs, proteins, and fats, they are your building blocks. Yes, we need proteins for a lot of stuff, fats for a lot of stuff, and carbs for a lot of stuff. They're like your mansion. You got these bricks or wood or whatever, but then the mortar that sticks it together, that's the micronutrients. And that's something that a lot of like nutrition coaches miss the boat on, is understanding how that works. And so when you think about like micros and macros, you need both. You can't just have one or the other. So where like pure paleo fails, but then pure macros also fails for performance. Now, if you're a couch potato and you're pure paleo, you're probably going to be okay. But if you're a CrossFitter and you're pure paleo, you're probably not going to do very well. So I think of the micros, like to make red blood cells, aside from the hormones needed like EPO and testosterone and blah, 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 I think of just the basic building blocks. Like you need B12, you need folate, you need zinc, you need copper, you need iron. And if we have any type of issue with a deficiency in those, we can really struggle to be aerobic. You got to think, nothing is infinite. This is where like my biochemistry professor in school was super weird. Just like, oh, you can always make methyl groups. It's no problem. B12, you always have that. No, we don't. Like, it's not infinite. Nothing is infinite. We run out of stuff eventually if we are burning through it or if we're not replacing it, or both. And so when you think of like B12 and folate, if we have a hard time digesting or absorbing things, we might not be able to absorb that, or if we're just not eating it. Vegans, for example, and vegetarians typically present with a B12 deficiency.
So in a previous conversation on resiliency, you mentioned that 8 out of 9 people come to you showing B12 deficiency.
Yep.
Is it possible that it's because they're trying to follow a macro prescription in some capacity, or they're just under micronutrienting themselves? Or
possible. That one is so N=1.
Okay.
I've seen that. Like I've seen people who are like, bacon and ice cream is my breakfast, but it hits my macros, so I'm good. It's like, okay, let's start talking about some broccoli you might want to eat now. So when we think about like absorption, CrossFit is super hard on the body. Like any high-level sport performance is hard on the body, but CrossFit, it's brutal. Like the amount of volume you need to be good at CrossFit is astronomical now. The level of competition out there is so high, you can't be an amateur hobbyist CrossFitter anymore. You got to get
and win, yeah.
And win, yeah. So you can't at the highest level.
Yeah.
I'm not talking local comps. I'm talking sanctionals in the games. So you want to get to that top level and really see how far you can take it. You've got to train hours and hours and hours and hours beyond what really we probably were evolved to do. So we're already stressing our system out. Now we have rest and digest, and we have fight or flight. Well, if we're in fight or flight much more often, which should be like a 60-40 balance, 60 fight or flight, 40 rest and digest or so, if we're constantly in fight or flight, we're not going to be able to digest as well. So I really think that most of the time, the reason why my CrossFitters that come to me, whether they're at that high level or just starting out, they're stressed. And you need enough rest and digest, parasympathetic tone, to get into a digestive state. Acetylcholine, B1, zinc, blah, blah, blah. You need all these things to make stomach acid. And if you can't do that, you can't absorb minerals either. So I see a lot of zinc deficiency. Like 9 out of 10 times I see a zinc deficiency in people that I work with.
Do you think that that stress is predominantly caused by training so hard, or do you think it's multiple things on top of that?
Oh man, it's probably a conglomerate of stuff, right? Like the perception of stress can alter the actual stress load on the body. So I just think of like stress, right? Like eustress is like, man, I jumped out of that plane, let's do it again. That's fun. Or like roller coasters. I love roller coasters. So that's a eustress. There's still a little bit of adrenaline. It's still a stressor on my system. If I hated it, you can just imagine how much harder it is on the body. So you take CrossFit, people love it, and then they go and do something that they hate, right? Or they get stuck in traffic, or they have a rough night, or whatever. So you take that stress and you mix up this stress, it's a lot of stress. Mm-hmm. So you want to talk about like reaching the highest levels of performance in a drug-free manner, you absolutely need to make sure that you have ample gut health, ample oxygen delivery, and really, really, really good insulin sensitivity, right? So if you don't have those things, you're screwed.
So let me come back to the first part around nutrition. You are essentially saying stress plus micronutrients is what creates the oxygen delivery mechanism, not mechanism, but the ability to deliver oxygen more effectively. That's
I'm not following the stress part.
Sorry, that's not for nutrition. I'm just saying the combination of those two things is intricately important to becoming more aerobic.
Yeah, so
less stress is.
Yeah, like let's say you eat while you work, right? You're a 39-year-old master's athlete who's a hedge fund manager, and you're working from early hours. Wall Street opens up, and then you're also following like European or Asia market. So you're just on the go all the time. So you got to eat while you work. You're not actually allowing yourself to get into a state of rest and digest. So you're limiting digestive capacity. So it's not about you are what you eat. That's been thrown out the window. You are what you eat, then absorb, and then do not get rid of. Mm. So if I eat, a steak, but I can't break it down, I don't have enough HCl or enzymes or whatever, and I have no capacity to digest, I'm not really any steak. In fact, I probably didn't absorb any of the vitamins and minerals in the steak, no iron, right? So it's possible to be eating red meat, green leafy vegetables, blah, 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 and be iron deficient, right? So we got to think about like the overall stress load. If we can make somebody's digestion better, for whatever reason it might not be better, then we can make them more aerobic essentially. And I've done this thousands and thousands of times where I didn't change any other variables. All we did is work on gut health, and they could PR a 1,300 meter score on a 60-minute row in 6 weeks at an already high level. They can go from like 15,000 to 16,300.
Would you consider that adaptation or cleanup?
I'd probably say a little bit of both. One, I would say you're not dampened anymore because I took out the dampening of the digestive and fueling issues, so that can dampen you and fatigue you. But then two, probably gave you the capacity to recover because I gave you those micronutrients, the mortar of the bricks, and I allowed you to do that. So if we have, like today, for example, the client I spoke to, they have a copper, a zinc, a folate, and a B12 deficiency.
NBD.
Yeah, no big deal, right? It's all good, macros.
Yeah.
But they die all the time. Like every time they do any conditioning stuff, if it's more than 3 reps, they're like, F this, I'm out. They suffer. So with that person, it's like, well, okay, like we want to work on the aerobic system and train and all that stuff, but like maybe let's back off training. Let's not do 5 days a week. Let's do 4 days a week. Give your body 1 extra day of rest. And let's start helping absorption. Now, they have a very high likelihood of some dysbiosis because of really high eosinophils and some other immune stuff going on.
I'm sorry to cut you off. What is dysbiosis?
Dys meaning like dysregulated, so off, and then biosis like biology. So like dysbiosis would be like bad gut health, bad biology of the gut. So all we really know right now about gut health is it needs to be diverse. We really don't know what strains do what in the body. Right? We're just guessing at this point because it's still really new. We just know diversity. But I can tell you that when we have high amounts of like candida or high amounts of parasites or whatever, And you're going to have this chronic inflammation thing. That inflammation is going to crush red blood cells. It's going to crush the capacity to be oxidative. It's going to aerobic. There, that's the word. I need more oxygen. But inflammation is going to crush performance, right? And inflammation in and of itself isn't bad. This is where like people are like, oh, we got to take anti-inflammatories because I have inflammation. It's not inherently true. Inflammation, it's like a wildfire or a fire in general. So you have a wildfire, that's bad, burns down a whole, 300,000 acres. But if I have a controlled burn that I'm doing to prevent the forest fire, that's good. So I do some bicep curls, I get a little inflamed, I get a little stronger, now I have the gun show. Great. Next time I do bicep curls at that weight, I'm not as messed up. My body adapted. Great. That's what we're looking for. But if I go too far, or if I have a lot of this stuff going on and I'm not sleeping and all these other things are happening, and then I go and work out and I just kind of tip it over too far, that controlled burn kind of goes over the line, sparks up an area that shouldn't be sparked, wildfire.
And you're saying that that inflammation, particularly around the gut, can actually harm the production of red blood cells, which kills the ability to...
Inflammation can have an impact on red blood cells, absolutely, but also your digestive health can impair the absorption of things that help you make red blood cells.
Gotcha.
Right? So we see that with, all sorts of different like blood chemistry markers in like a CBC and even in a CMP. You can look at that and be like, that's pointing towards like some serious gut stuff. So either do a stool test, which stool tests are kind of known for not always being the most accurate thing out there, but it's the best we have. So you got to take like, what is this person looking like? What is the data saying? And like put it together and look for the patterns. But yeah, if we have gut inflammation stuff, like people make fun of it all the time, like, oh, is this gut health? It's a very big performance killer. So things like I would always ask my clients, how many bowel movements a day? Great, 1 to 2, should be like clockwork, should be smooth, comes out, no cracks, well formed, no real stench. Should also be like 1 to 2 wipes tops. If you're having like 5, 6, 7 wipes, something's going on that needs to be looked at. And just by fixing that alone, I've seen people perform astronomically higher. And I don't mean like, oh, they got like a 5-pound PR. I had one guy put 20 pounds on his power snatch in 6 weeks, and he was already power snatching like 250. So it's something to be said about it. Now, again, you have your own nervous system in your gut. So we can't just say, it's inflammation, that's the killer of it all. Your gut is connected to your brain. 90%-ish of the nerve that connects the brain to the gut goes in the direction of the gut to the brain. It's called the vagus nerve. That puppy innervates like everything. That's why it's called vagus. So when we think about like the enteric nervous system, this bad boy is going to tell this bad boy what's up. So you want to talk about hormones? Your hypothalamus, that's like the master switch in the brain. It's checking everything. It's getting signals like, hey, what's your inflammation like? What are we doing with toxicity? How are we doing with body temperature? What are we doing with emotional stress? All these different things could be happening in the body and in the mind that alters your physiology. If you got a lot of inflammation down here, we know that that can crush testosterone. We know that testosterone is one of the things that you need to kind of make red blood cells. So inflammation can kill that. Inflammation in and of itself can reduce efficiency of a lot of stuff, like mitochondria, for example. Like you can run out of glutathione. Low glutathione causes a lot of problems, right? So if you're constantly tanking your immune system and you're running through your vitamin C stores and blah, 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 you're just going to have a hard day. So inflammation has like this cascading thing where it's like, we want a little bit, but we don't want it to facilitate itself. And that's where like autoimmune can go rampant. I've worked with people that have autoimmunity to where like just a little bit of intensity sets them off and they're like in the hospital. Like we think of people as like, you need to exercise to get healthy. No, you have to be healthy enough to exercise. That's where that resiliency base comes from. The 3 primary, secondary, and then the tertiary. If those 3 aren't good, you really don't have any business putting exercise on top of that just yet. Go for a walk. That's it. Stop lifting. But once this is built out pretty well, then yeah, you go to this. Now in the remote coaching world, most people have this built out enough that we can go into fitness right away. I've worked with a handful of people that I've had to say no exercise. Like you're not allowed to train for the next like 6 months. You can go for a walk, 10 minutes a day. That's it. And eventually they get better and whatnot. But there are people out there that are so incredibly sick that exercise can kill them. They're so unhealthy that they're not healthy enough to work out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if I come back, and essentially the topics we hit on were nutrition and more specifically micronutrients. gut health, inflammation. You touched on insulin sensitivity. What about insulin sensitivity is really important for the aerobic system?
So when I think of like insulin sensitivity, I don't think of just like hyperinsulinemia and type 2 diabetes and like the carb insulin relationship. Like, yeah, like you could cause insulin resistance through that if you're eating donuts day in and day out. But what I'm thinking of is how do we get that cell to accept fuel and basically do what it needs to do so we can make energy, right? So there's a lot of things that can cause insulin resistance. It's not just carbohydrate. So if you think it's purely carbohydrate, you're wrong. It's not just carbohydrate. In fact, I've seen people that have low carbohydrate diets have very high insulin resistance. I've seen people with high carbohydrate diets have insulin resistance. I've seen people with 5% body fat have insulin resistance. So we can't say it's purely about body fat levels or carbohydrate levels either.
It's never one freaking answer, is it?
No, it's not. So as an example, like insulin sensitivity, you can lose insulin sensitivity because of inflammation, sex hormone problems. So like if you're toxic and you have a lot of like heavy metals or chemical environmental pollutants and your hormone balance is off a little bit, or liver congestion, that can cause insulin problems or insulin sensitivity problems. Hyperlipidemia, we see a lot of people, especially I've seen it in CrossFit over the last couple of years, like high amounts of elevated free fatty acids, right? That's insulin resistance.
How would that happen?
You can't burn fat, for example, so you mobilize the fat and then you can't burn it. That also happens when people can't deliver oxygen or use oxygen very well. I see that a ton in my population where it's like, hey, like you have low reticulocyte count, you got some anemia stuff going on, and you're having a hard time burning fat. You get way more energy because fat's more carbon dense. You get way more energy from fat than you do sugar. There's a time and place to burn fat and sugar. You should be burning primarily fat right now. But if you have issues with using oxygen, you could end up tired just sitting there. Like people that are anemic, they're not full of energy. They're not like jumping off the walls hyperactive all the time. So when you think of like fat burning, if you have a hard time with the aerobic systems, you could actually end up being, resistant to burning fat. And then those elevated free fatty acids, that can cause some insulin stuff too.
Is it fair to say that this is very circular, i.e., you need to have all these inputs to help your aerobic system improve, and then the aerobic system improving then essentially makes some of these systems work better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like one thing with movement, like I've done probably 25,000 movement assessments at this point in my career, and having taught movement all over the world, the one thing I've noticed is, honestly, to get people more mobile, it's not that tough. Like to get them better mobility, make them more aerobic. Simple, but not so simple because becoming more aerobic is extremely complex, right? Mm-hmm. So when I think of somebody that just needs to get more bendy or flexy, stretching isn't going to do that. Stretching just makes you have better stretch tolerance. Like, congratulations, you can tolerate the stretch a little bit longer. Good for you, awesome. If it feels good and makes you happy, do it. I'm not going to stop you. But if you really want to make a lasting change, get somebody more aerobic because that helps them get more parasympathetic. That alters the nervous system, which is the king of it. And we can actually make people have better ranges of motion, right? So sometimes, like, I used to teach this in CCP, lay on your stomach and breathe. Okay, great. Stand up, touch your toes. Oh my gosh, he can touch his toes. He's never touched his toes in his life. Did I really change anything? I didn't change muscles. I just relaxed them. Breathing, right? Something as simple as that. So when you make somebody have more aerobic capacity or you just make them more parasympathetic, you basically build this like base that allows for a lot more stuff to get stacked onto it. And one of those things is movement. So we tend to think of things like, I take a very neurocentric approach towards everything. So I think of the nervous system as telling the muscles to get tight. The muscles aren't just doing something on their own. There's a control system there. Software is doing it. So if I make you more aerobic, I can make your muscles loosen up. I can make your hips loosen up. But why are you not aerobic? Are you chronically inflamed? Are you holding your breath? Do you have anxiety? Are you not sleeping? Are your hormones messed up? Do we have some form of anemia? Do we have an insulin sensitivity problem? Like, are we just intolerant, glucose intolerant or whatever? All those things, they tend to rectify when we fix those like 5 things, the 3 primary, secondary, and tertiary. When those things get optimized, things tend to fall into place. Anna Hartman told me that want to say 4 years ago when I was at Exos for a couple conferences. She basically was just like, yeah, if you just get people more aerobic, movement cleans up. And it's true.
So do me a favor, because this is a different conversation, will you remind people what the primary, secondary, tertiary, what those parts are?
Yeah. If they haven't watched the first one that we did a while back, whatever, it's basically you have glucose tolerance or like insulin sensitivity in my books. That's just how I think about it. I think of gut health, and then I think of oxygen delivery. Those are my primary ones. Because those are the
Primary
ones,
for what? Sorry.
resiliency.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's because that's what I can directly impact. I can't impact hormones directly because I can't prescribe, right? And I can't give you Ambien to make you fall asleep. But if I take care of those three things and we work on like habits of sleep, like, hey, get off your phone at 10 p.m., maybe put your phone down at 9, like go put your head down at 9:30. We do all those habit things, sleep will tend to clear itself up. And then tend to, not always, but it tends to. But then if we need to, there's certain sleep supplements out there that can help. But then from there, sleep's good and we give you time and we stop overtaxing you and training and whatever. Hormones tend to kind of balance out as well. Now I'm not talking super physiological hormones for like bodybuilders where we're trying to like inject testosterone and all the other stuff they take. But in general for health and for like performance in a drug tested sport, yeah, it actually works really well to take care of those three things.
And the fact that those habits are essentially self-compounding, you know what I mean? That it will help you get better in other facets of your life, not just in that one specific place.
Yeah.
You know, to put the pieces together, basically, for the
Yeah.
foundation.
Yeah, because you have more energy, you feel better. There's also something to be said, though, about like not having the energy to go and change habits. Some people are just too tired to want to change anything. They're just too drained. So those are the people that I jumpstart the system with. I'm like, all right, you know what? Like, let's take a B complex. Let's take some hepatic support stuff. Let's go ahead and calm down your nervous system a bit. Let's make you feel better with a couple supplements, and like maybe in about 4 weeks you'll feel good enough to like maybe
Go for
do
it.
something else, and then we can change that habit at that point. You know what I mean? So you can't always tell people change your habits first, change your habits first, change your habits first. BLGs, like what we call them BLGs, they don't fix anything. You can't eat and sleep your way out of an issue. There's a stimulus and your body's adapted to it. You've got to project or interject a new stimulus that's stronger to make the body go, oh, I'm going to adapt to this thing now. That's why we have progressive overload. Progressive overload is the principle, but it's the same thing with changing physiology. If I give you a B12 supplement and that's it, I'm probably not changing anything. But if I hammer it and hammer it and hammer it with lifestyle and all these other things, yeah, your body's going to start adapting in a different way. Body comp changes, metabolism changes, hormones can change, your sleep changes, your PRs get up higher and higher and higher. So again, like the resiliency thing, if you don't have that dialed in, you're not going to be able to build a big fitness base. And without a big fitness base, you're not peaking very high.
Let's call it right there. Guys, Michael, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll see you next time.